So we've got some updates on why the CIA director secretly flew to Moscow on Tuesday, including an assessment that a critical shortage of interceptors in Europe may be leading Putin to consider the dangerous gamble of attacking NATO directly. Also, right here is one of the trucks that your donations provided for soldiers to move into positions in the East. Your donations are literally saving lives today, day in and day out. I mean, think of what this would look like if these soldiers had to make this trip on foot. Anyways, we've got new footage from the units that we're supporting as we kick off our fall campaign. More on that at the end of today's video. Now, this whole thing is a really big deal. The last time a CIA director made this trip unannounced was in 2021 to warn Russia that we knew they were planning to invade Ukraine. In turn, this is pretty notable and likely marks a major event playing out behind the scenes. Now, after a full day of speculation, we now have some statements from the United States, Russia, some of our European allies, and multiple publications citing their own sources from within the administration. So here's what we've got. Starting out with the Wall Street Journal, kind of taking the stance like we talked about in yesterday's video, that this was about warning Russia to not attack NATO. And I want to stress that this was reported by the Wall Street Journal, CBS, and others. This is the dominant narrative as of today. The Wall Street Journal said the surprise visit by the director of the Central Intelligence Agency to Moscow this week was to deliver a warning to Russia not to attack NATO countries, according to people briefed on the visit. U.S. officials are concerned that Putin, squeezed in Ukraine and under pressure at home, could launch an assault ranging from a cyber attack to a small-scale land incursion, likely on a Baltic nation. Again, personally, this is what I think is most likely. I think this has been in the cards for some time, and we are seeing it still play out. I mean, overnight, we saw more Russian drones enter Moldovan airspace. So not NATO, but again, Russia kind of testing the boundaries of maybe Europe in general. The Wall Street Journal there as well added that a shortfall in critical Western munitions driven by expenditures in the Iran war could also factor into Putin's thinking. And we've actually got more of a deep dive on that from the Associated Press in a moment, where they actually use the term critical, let's see, make sure I get this right, critical shortage of missile interceptors in Europe, which is significant. And whether or not that is entirely accurate, right? We're getting sources and unnamed officials, all of that stuff. You have to imagine that that plays into some of Putin's thinking. We know that we've expended a lot of munitions. That has to factor in some way, shape, or form to Russia's current and future plans. Now, in terms of official responses here, still pretty muddy. President Trump earlier today in the Oval Office said when asked this question about Putin attacking NATO, he said, quote, "I've had good talks with him. He is not going to be attacking NATO territory." So I guess we're good, right? Resolved. I would actually argue that if that's even a conversation at all, it's pretty notable. But nonetheless, that's the statement from the U.S. president. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, added that reports in the media about alleged Russian aggression against NATO countries have nothing to do with reality. I feel like we need to put these official statements out there, but they're also completely in line with what I would expect, regardless of what the conversation had actually was. Turning to the Russian response here, military informant, a Russian war correspondent or military blogger, was citing the Russian foreign affairs spokesperson, Maria Zakharova, who actually threatened the United Kingdom just yesterday. So again, we've got some officials saying there's nothing, don't worry about it. Russia is not planning to attack NATO in no way, shape, or form. Then we've got the foreign ministry spokesperson yesterday saying, quote, "We have repeatedly warned that any military facilities and equipment belonging to Britain, both in Ukraine and beyond, could become targets in response to Ukrainian strikes on Russian territory using British weapons." So she made clear that it's not British targets in Ukraine, but outside of Ukraine, as in like in British territory. So that would be an attack on a NATO country, right? Which seems to kind of contradict some of the other statements we're getting out of Russia. But either way, I think the good quote here from military informant in reporting on that said, quote, "One day they will definitely be afraid. And the most important thing is that they believe." And that's kind of the theme here, is we're seeing Russia continue to push in a number of different directions and try to get the United States and NATO and Europe and Ukraine to kind of give in and accede to Russian demands the more they push. And I do want to stress that these Russian incursions into NATO territory and European territory, and we went through a number of them outlined by Malcontent News, again, an incredible source we'll have linked in the description below, just yesterday. It's been a lot. And I had a good friend send me a note about this and say, what's going on? Like, how on earth? Like, is Russia really even thinking about testing NATO? They have been. Like, it should be front page news. It gives you an idea of how chaotic our news diet is right now. It should be front page news that a Russian missile landed in NATO territory and that the Polish think it was fired there intentionally, even if it flew off course and was wildly off target. Even that is crazy. And it's not a blip on the radar. No pun intended. We've got drones flying into NATO territory on a regular basis, and it is not like front page news, or it shows up on a back page in one of these publications and we don't ever hear about it again. That is crazy. So anyways, Russia continues doing this. And just yesterday, it was drones into Moldovan airspace. The Moldovan president, Maya Sandu, said, quote, "Hours before Moldova marks 35 years of independence, our airspace was repeatedly violated by Russian drones. I strongly condemn this intimidation." The Moldovan Ministry of Defense said that there were 5 different drones that entered and then exited Moldovan airspace. So again, kind of probing, right? How much can you get away with? What happens when a missile lands in your territory so long as it doesn't kill anybody? Is that okay? What if we fly a drone through your territory, but it doesn't actually strike in your territory? This is what Russia has been doing for a long time, and they're continuing to do it right now. Now, I mentioned that we're going to go back to the idea of munition shortages, which it is a conversation. So much of this is classified that it's very hard to pin down exactly where the things sit, but I think passing the common sense test at this point is we certainly have fewer munitions today available than we did 6 months ago and fewer than we had a year ago. All right. So if you are an adversary of the United States and you're not stupid, you're looking at that and taking it into consideration in terms of what you're doing. The Associated Press reported on this today. And of course, all of these sources will be linked in the description below. They said the U.S. military is experiencing a, quote, beyond critical shortage of advanced missile interceptors in Europe, largely driven by President Trump's war with Iran, a U.S. defense official in Europe and a NATO official told the Associated Press, raising concerns about vulnerabilities in NATO countries to a potential Russian attack. Now, something to make clear here is when we're talking about Russia probing or attacking NATO, this is not an all or nothing situation. So it is not like war or no war, like you push the button or you don't. And it's kind of what Russia is banking on, is that they can continue to prod and kind of degrade what Article 5 actually looks like, what the NATO alliance actually looks like. I would be surprised, very surprised, if Russia decided to launch munitions and missiles directly against anything in NATO territory. That's a little too overt, even for Russia. Nonetheless, the Associated Press article continues along kind of with that assumption, citing these officials, saying, quote, in the event of a Russian ballistic missile assault on, for example, a military headquarters or power plant, NATO could be in a similar position to Patriot-starved Ukraine and be forced to take punch after punch in the mouth, a U.S. defense official said. In Europe, the American military, quote, definitely does not have enough Patriots to stop any possible sustained ballistic missile attack and would have very limited capability to defend against a single ballistic missile strike or stray Russian missile that goes off course, the U.S. official said. That feels a little too doomer to me. Again, we're just having to go with the gut at this point, and no doubt we have shot through a lot of interceptors. The idea that right now a Russian missile attack on a NATO military headquarters would be forced to take punch after punch after punch, I'm hard-pressed to believe. I mean, even if you take some of the recent assessments put out by, I think it was CSIS, did one recently, they had us, I mean, even those numbers, you would have to think that NATO military headquarters would have some degree of protection and would not just suck up Russian missile after Russian missile. That seems a little bit extreme. And the same with the idea that limited capability to defend against a single ballistic missile strike or a stray Russian missile. That feels too far. All right. That said, if those officials are accurate in their assessment, that's a major problem, to say the least. All right. If a single Russian missile could be enough to penetrate air defenses based off of a certain location, that's a monumental problem. It just seems a little too much for me. Again, personal opinion, kind of going with the gut on this one. I don't think we are quite to that point. There was some pushback in this article. It was buried down in there, but I do want to call out the U.S. Army. Let's see, it was U.S. Army Colonel Martin O'Donnell, who's a NATO spokesperson, said, quote, it is simply not the case that the number of Patriot missiles in Europe is beyond critical. They did quote as well the chief Pentagon spokesperson Sean Parnell that said these claims are false. Quote, We have everything required to strike at the time and place of the president's choosing across multiple combatant commands. We have already executed successful operations while maintaining a deep, ready arsenal to defend our people and our interests. Not got to take a lot of that with a grain of salt. I think we overplay, especially from the Pentagon, overplay what we have available and what we have in stockpiles. But I felt like it was worth bringing up that the article there and the topic in the article was being pushed back on. Now, turning to our Baltic partners, something I think is interesting here is the key narrative, again, across multiple organizations and a lot of analysts looking at this, is the idea that the CIA director was warning Russia, do not attack NATO. And it fits with a lot of what we've seen recently and Russian tactics. The Kyiv Independent is reporting that Baltics, a couple nations here, Estonia and Latvia, are not adjusting their assessments or their risk assessments. They said, quote, Estonia and Latvia on August 27th reiterated that they remain vigilant, but their overall assessment of Russia's threat remains unchanged, despite media reports about the U.S. intelligence chief warning Moscow against possible provocations targeting NATO's frontier. They quoted Latvia's Prime Minister Kohlbergs directly, saying, quote, I want to clearly tell the people of Latvia there is currently no reason for concern. Latvia's level of military threat has not changed. The risk of direct military invasion threats to Latvia is currently low. Readiness for a possible threat is not the same as an immediate threat. Those two things must not be confused. Again, to reiterate here, there's a wide range of what Russia could do. I am not in any way, shape, or form expecting Russian missile attacks into NATO territory, also not expecting any sort of armored Russian column trying to push into NATO territory. I think we have a lot of the gray zone still to deal with, and Russia has found out that there's no penalty at this point to accidentally, quote, have a missile impact in Poland. There's no penalty to having drones fly through Polish or other NATO member territory. I think they've got a lot of ways to go before we see what would actually look like an act of war, troops moving into a NATO country. Nonetheless, interesting that one of the assessments is that is what the warning was, while we have NATO member countries saying no change to our threat assessment. I guess one way you could read that is they have always been so concerned about this that now that it's a bigger concern, it kind of matches their expectations, if you know what I mean. I do want to bring up kind of not necessarily contradicting, but a different view presented by the New York Times just a couple hours ago, where they say John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, made a secretive visit to Moscow this week to privately share his bleak assessment of the state of the Russian war against Ukraine and to urge the Russians to cut a deal before their military and economic situation gets worse, current and former officials said. They said Mr. Ratcliffe delivered the message to Alexander Bortnikov, the head of Russia's FSB intelligence service, and made no threats about potential consequences for the Russian side should President Putin ignore the CIA director's assessment and choose to continue fighting. CIA analysts have long questioned whether Mr. Putin's advisors have given him honest assessments of the war's trajectory and toll. Again, this is one that, it's a major publication. They're citing government officials and all that. So I feel like it's worth bringing up, if nothing else, to show that everybody is not on board with the idea that this is simply pushing back on a possible attack against NATO. This one doesn't pass the common sense test to me, right? One of the major concerns, no doubt, inside of Russia is whether or not Putin is getting genuine and honest assessments up and down his chain of command. I don't think he probably has not for some time, just based off of statements we've heard from him. So I don't know that going to that chain of command and saying, we know you're not telling Putin the truth, is really going to change Putin's mind, right? This seems like something, if you're trying to show Putin, for instance, you are not winning the war the way that you think you are, that seems like an easy conversation for President Trump to have directly with Putin, right? Instead of having to go through some of these middlemen that very well might be blurring the lines already. In fact, Russia's FSB, their intelligence is it's pretty formidable, always has been. So, I would be pretty surprised if Russian intelligence services do not understand the full scope of how the war is going. I don't know that they need the CIA to break that news to them. Nonetheless, the idea here is that this was kind of the CIA director being one of the more hawkish members of the administration as it relates to hawkish towards Russia and more pro-Ukraine than a lot of other folks in the administration. When you look at a lot of the people involved in the negotiations, there's been some skepticism with people like Witkoff and Kushner that are maybe a little too close to Russia, maybe a little too optimistic about what Russia is saying and maybe not standing as much in Ukraine's corner. There's been pushback with that. Ratcliffe is somebody that kind of falls on the other end of that spectrum or more in that other direction. If you're trying to make more of a threatening statement to Russia to say, hey, we know where you are, and this is a problem. You guys can't keep this up for much longer. Technically, Ratcliffe could be one of the people you would look to deliver that message. I think Ratcliffe more so than, honestly, Rubio, more than Hegseth, more than Vance, certainly. So there's something to that. I don't know. I think, again, that message is one president to president if you're actually trying to get that across rather than CIA to Intel head. Now, I thought we were going to be kicking this off down the road like another week or two, but the great team over at Car for Ukraine got this ready early, so here we go. Our fall campaign is off and running as of today. So we're helping a number of units to include the 104th Territorial Defense Brigade, 26th Assault, and 44th Mechanized. And this time around, in addition to the unique campaign patches, we've got a couple of them now, are patches from the units that we've supported in the past. So with €200 donation and up, you can get one from the 34th Marines, the 3rd, or the 25th Assault. And of course, €2,500 can get you custom branding on the side of the vehicle. Here's an example, a little memorial to Cole, man's best friend, a couple months back. So links in the pinned comment and description to learn more. Also, at that website that we've got for the campaign, you can see all these videos from the units, like the thank you videos, the request videos, and then the videos of the trucks that you have provided actually being utilized. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.